Third talk, delivered by me to a pretty rarefied assemblage. I began thus. In order that all my explanations and elucidations, as well as the lectures and reports of different instructors specially prepared for applying my ideas practically in life, whom it is my intention from this year to adjoin to your group from time to time also, should be productive and give real results during your future general meetings and your private encounters and exchanges of opinion. In other words, in order that all your talks having relation to my ideas should not assume such a character as they have had till now, namely, as I have recently called them, meetings for collective titillation. I want today, already at this what may be called first meeting on new principles, to give you, as a so to say precept, some advice which has relation only to you Americans in general, and especially to those composing the given group, the infallible fulfilling of which advice may alone, in my opinion, in the now created conditions, stop the development of the disastrous consequences of the causes provoked by the errors in the past. This benevolent advice of mine to you Americans, composing in the given case this group, and who became, thanks to a series of accidentally arranged circumstances of life, my nearest essential friends, consists in indicating the categorical necessity that each of you should cease entirely, at least for 3 months, the reading of your newspapers and magazines, and during this time should become as well acquainted as possible with the contents of all 3 books of the first series of my writings entitled An Objectively Impartial Criticism of the Life of Man. An acquaintance with the contents of these books is quite indispensable for each of you, chiefly in order to obtain, directly or indirectly, information elucidated from all sides regarding all those definite notions upon which will be based and from which will logically derive all the problems which are pursued for practical attainments. It was just for this purpose that your group was organised and is now reorganised to consist of people who have more or less cognised the absurdity of our ordinary life, and who, although you have not yet sensed it with all your being, but are seriously striving to take in what you have cognised, are continuing to learn as many aspects of the objective truth as possible, so as to determine, in accordance with this, your own real individuality, in order to manifest afterwards in everything in a way corresponding to a godlike creature. It must be said that all I have expounded in the 3 books of the first series in its totality embraces almost all the questions which, in my opinion, formed on the basis of long years of experimental elucidations, may arise under the conditions of contemporary life in the ordinary mentation of man, and the elucidation of all these questions has been made by me in such a logical sequence and in such a confrontative form as helping to accustom the reader automatically to active mentation and contributing to an easy and simultaneous theoretical assimilation of the very essence of the questions dealt with, should give the possibility to cognise, first of all, not only with one's ordinary automatic consciousness, which in this case has no value, but with all one's being, that which is most important and is unfailingly required for the possibility of further work upon oneself, namely the ephemeral nature of former conceptions and understandings. An all-round acquaintance with the contents of these 3 books is necessary also in order that when I personally, or the mentioned instructors, speak during our general meetings about some question which in the given moment is the centre of gravity question, and speak about its details, we may, for the purpose of economising time, simply refer to the corresponding chapter in this first series, and you, already having preliminary information about this, may easily assimilate what we shall subsequently develop in detail. For example, intending in today's meeting to speak about a question which is based on data I have already more or less elucidated in the last chapter of the 3rd book, namely in the chapter entitled From the Author, the deliberations on the proposed question today should be as a continuation of this chapter. Well, if you are all well informed of its contents, then I could, for the purpose of economizing time, refer to the requisite passages, but now I shall be compelled to waste time on reading to you certain extracts. In the present case, one requires chiefly the knowledge of that part of the last chapter called the addition, which I wrote after I had very definitely shown in this chapter the complete automatism of contemporary man and his complete nullity in respect to the independent manifestation of his individuality. Having said this, I asked my secretary to read the extracts to which I referred. Word for word, the content of these extracts is as follows. Such is the ordinary average man, an unconscious slave of the whole service to all universal purposes which are alien to his own personal individuality. He may live through all his life as he arose and was crystallized thanks to all kinds of influences eventually forming the conditions of life around him, and as such after death be destroyed forever. And although this is the lot of every life, yet at the same time great nature gave to some lives, as in the given case to man, corresponding possibilities to be not merely a blind tool of the whole entire service to the all-universal aim, but at the same time serving nature and actualizing consciously what is predetermined for him, to produce what is required in excess, and to utilize this excess for his egoism, that is to say, for the definition and manifestation of his own individuality. This possibility is given also for serving the common aim. As for the equilibrium of these objective laws, such relatively liberated, self-constructed, independent lives, and in particular of human origin, are also necessary. Speaking thus about it, I consider it my moral duty here to add, and particularly to underline that, although the said liberation is possible for man, not every man has a chance to attain it. There are a great many causes which do not permit it, and which in most cases depend neither upon us personally, nor upon great cosmic laws, but only upon various accidental conditions of our arising and formation, among which the chief are, of course, heredity, and the conditions under which the process of our preparatory age flows. It is just these uncontrollable conditions which may not permit this liberation. Stopping the reader at this point, I explain that of the contents of the subsequent few pages, omitted for the purpose of saving time, it is only necessary for the theme of this evening to know about the comparison which I had made there between human life as a whole and the flow of a big river forking, at a certain place corresponding, according to my definition, to the time of man's reaching responsible age, that is, that age when it becomes definite in a man whether he has succeeded by that time in acquiring data for possessing his own eye into two streams, one of which flows into the limitless ocean for subsequent movement evolutionarily for itself, and the other into the nether regions for subsequent but involutionary movement, in this case only for the needs of nature. Then I pointed out the place from which the reading should in the present case be continued. For us contemporary people, continued to read the secretary, the chief evil is that on reaching responsible age we acquire, thanks to the various conditions of our ordinary existence established by us ourselves, chiefly in consequence of the abnormal, what is called education, a common presence corresponding only to that stream of the river of life which ultimately empties itself into the nether regions, and entering it, we remain passive and, without reflecting about the consequences of this state, submit to the flow and drift on and on. As long as we remain passive, we should have in the course of our further existence to submit slavishly to every caprice of all sorts of blind events, and as a result inevitably shall serve solely as means for nature's involutionary and evolutionary constructions. As most of you present here and listening to my explanations have already, as is said, crossed over into responsible age, and after my explanations sincerely cognise that until now you have not acquired your own I, and at the same time, according to the essence of all that I have said here, you have not pictured for yourselves any particularly agreeable perspectives, then, in order that you, just you who have cognised this, should not be greatly, as is said, disheartened, and should not fall into the so-called pessimism prevalent everywhere in the contemporary abnormal life of people, I say quite sincerely, without any arrière-pensée, that according to my convictions, which have been formed thanks to long years of investigations, strengthened by numerous quite exceptionally conducted experiments on the results of which is based the Institute for the Harmonious Development of Man, founded by me, even for you, everything is not yet lost. My special investigations and experimentally statistical elucidations on this subject showed me clearly and very definitely that by great all-solicitous Mother Nature, the possibility is also foreseen for beings to acquire the kernel of their essence, that is to say, their own I, even after entering into responsible age. The foresight of equitable nature consists in the given case in this, that the possibility is given to us after our completed formation into responsible life, by our own intentions through certain inner experiences and certain outer conditions, to crystallise in our common presence data for the obtaining of such a kernel, of course with greater difficulty than in preparatory age. The process of intentional formation in one's presence of such data is conditioned by the difficulties of crossing over from one stream of the river of life to the other. It is interesting to note here that the expression often used by contemporary people, of course quite automatically, without any understanding of its hidden sense, the first liberation of man, signifies, according to the interpretation of initiates of one school existing presently in Central Asia, just that supposed figurative understanding which I, in my writings, formulated as the possibility for each drop of water of the prime general river to cross from the stream which is predetermined to disappear into the nether regions, into the stream which empties itself into the vast space of the boundless ocean. As to the possibility of this crossing for a man who, in his responsible age, has already entered into the stream of the nether region, although it is given by great nature, I must warn you, in order not to provoke in you, so to say, light-hearted illusions, regarding this possibility to cross from one stream to another, that it is not so easily, merely to wish and you cross. For this it is indispensable, with a constantly active consciousness, first of all with extremely great intensity, to obtain the intentional crystallization in oneself of the data for engendering in one's common presence an unquenchable impulse of desire for such a crossing, and then will follow a long inner struggle, requiring great tension of all the inner forces with the obvious abnormalities crystallized in one's individuality, and evident even to one's own self-reasoning, that is to say, a struggle with the crystallized habits unworthy for man, even in his own understanding in a period of repose, which contribute, first, to the arising in us of our inner evil God, and second, to the supporting and increasing in us of its power and strength always and in everything, namely that evil God, the presence of which creates ideal conditions, especially in contemporary people, for enjoying a state of immutable peace. Speaking shortly, there will be required all kinds of corresponding, very complicated and difficult preparations. At this point, interrupting the reader again, I continued thus. From the contents of the fragment which has just been read, each of you should already at least understand that the indispensable condition which is first of all required from a man for his still possible arrival on a new path, namely the path of evolutionary movement, is to have at least some data for the acquisition of his own I. In the case of a man in whom, because of the conditions of his preparatory age, the time preordained by nature for the purpose of the natural crystallization in his common presence of data for possessing in responsible age his own I has not been made use of, then, if in responsible age, when in general sane reasoning can sometimes be lawfully manifested in man, he accidentally grasps this fact and resolves to attain the possibility to be such as he ought to be in reality, namely to have his own individuality, conditioned by the unquestionable possession of his own I. He must, for this purpose, first of all, unfailingly and consciously begin to crystallize in himself 7 data, as was established by really wise people of all ancient epochs, specially inherent only in man, data which have for the quality of manifestation a reciprocal action between themselves, in complete accordance with the fundamental law of the world, the sacred heptaparapashinok. Today I shall speak about only 3 of these 7 psychic factors proper to man alone. In the general psychic functioning of man, in certain automatically formed or intentionally created conditions depending upon mental associations and feeling experiences, these 3 factors engender in the general presence of man 3 definite impulses. Before continuing to explain just what is necessary and how one must consciously, both inwardly and outwardly, manifest oneself in order to obtain the arising in oneself of such data inherent only in man, which ought also to appear as lawful aspects of the whole individuality of a real man, I shall be compelled, on account of the absence in the English language of any exact verbal designation of these 3 impulses, and, as a consequence, the absence of an approximate understanding of them, to waste my time, in order to give you an approximate understanding of them, and choose for them some more or less corresponding conventional names which we shall use in our subsequent talks. For an approximate definition of the first of these 3 human impulses which must arise and manifest themselves in a real man, one might employ the English word can, yet not in the sense in which this word is used in the contemporary English language, but in the sense in which Englishmen used it before what is called the Shakespearean epoch. Although for the exact definition of the second of these human impulses in the contemporary English language there is a word, namely wish, it is nevertheless employed by you Americans, as well as by the English people themselves, only in order to vary, of course unconsciously, the degree of the expression of that, so to say, slavish impulse, for which there are, particularly in this language, a multitude of words as, for example, like want, need, desire, and so on. And as regards a word for the expression and understanding of the third definite aforementioned human impulse, in the whole lexicon of words in the English language, there cannot be found one even approximately corresponding. This impulse, proper exclusively to man, can be defined in the English language only descriptively, that is, with many words. I should define it now in the following words: the entire sensing of the whole of oneself. This third impulse, which should be sometimes in the waking state of man, one of certain definite manifestations in the general presence of every normal man, is of all the 7 exclusively proper to man impulses the most important, because its association with the first 2, namely those which I have already said, can be approximately expressed in English by the words can and wish, almost composes and represents the genuine I of a man who has reached responsible age. It is only in a man with such an I that these 3 impulses, 2 of which are approximately defined in English by the words I can and I wish, acquire in their turn that significance which I presume, which significance and the corresponding force of action from their manifestation is obtained only in a man who by his intentional efforts obtains the arising in himself of data for engendering these impulses sacred for a man. Only such a man, when he consciously says, I am, he really is. I can, he really can. I wish, he really wishes. When I wish, I feel with my whole being that I wish and can wish. This does not mean that I want, that I need, that I like, or lastly, that I desire. No, I wish. I never like, never want. I do not desire anything, and I do not need anything. All this is slavery. If I wish something, I must like it, even if I do not like it. I can wish to like it, because I can. I wish, I feel with my whole body that wish. I wish, because I can wish. Based on my own experience, I consider it absolutely necessary to note here that the difficulty of a clear understanding of all this without a long and deep reflection and, in general, the complication of the process of standing on the right path, of the obtaining in one's common presence of factors, for engendering even only these first three, from the number of 7, impulses characterizing genuine man, derives, from the very first attempts, from the fact that, on the one hand, these impulses can exist almost exclusively when one has one's own genuine I, and, on the other hand, the I can be in man almost exclusively when he has in him these 3 impulses. For the conscious developing in oneself of the given impulses inherent only in man, I intend to recommend to you some of those simple exercises which were also previously presented in detail in the program of the Institute founded by me, and were to be explained to the pupils who reached the mesoteric group. I said simple because in various serious schools, existing even in present times, for the self-perfecting of man, there are, for the same purpose, very complicated exercises. For a real influencing of the common presence of those who do all these special exercises, and for an easy assimilation of what is required and necessary, you must know first of all that the obtained totality of results of various functions proceeding in the psychic life of people, which is called attention, is itself split automatically by the accidental surrounding conditions, as well as by an intentional force of will, into several definite parts, and each of these parts may be, of course also by itself as well as intentionally, concentrated on something special with a definite intensity. For the given case, it is indispensable first to learn to divide one's entire attention in 3 approximately equal parts, and to concentrate each separate part simultaneously for a definite time on 3 diverse inner or outer objects. For the possibility of a practical achieving of this aim in the same mentioned detailed program were indicated a series of exercises under the name of soil preparing. Although the exercises indicated in the circumstantial program were intentionally composed in sequence, and it was required to begin from number 1, yet for you Americans in general, on account of several misunderstandings in the past, I consider it most useful to start from number 4. This exercise, number 4, from the series for preparing the soil, is performed in reality thus. First, all one's attention must be divided approximately into 3 equal parts. Each of these parts must be concentrated on one of the 3 fingers of the right or the left hand, for instance the forefinger, the third and the fourth, constating in one finger the result proceeding in it of the organic process called sensing, in another the result of the process called feeling, and with the third making any rhythmical movement and at the same time automatically conducting with the flowing of mental association a sequential or varied manner of counting. Here there again rises the question of the poverty of the English language, this time in the sense that the contemporary people belonging to the English race, and you Americans also, who have borrowed their language and use it in your ordinary life, totally lack any understanding of the difference between 2 entirely distinct impulses of an average man, namely, between the impulse of feeling and that of sensing. Since an understanding of this difference between these 2 impulses is very important for my subsequent indications concerning all the exercises required for you, as well as concerning the real nature of the psyche of man, I shall be compelled once more to interrupt the logical sequence of the elucidation of the theme I have begun, and again waste my time on explaining, if only approximately for the present, this unexpectedly arisen philologically psychic question. In order to explain to you this very important question, the difference between sensing and feeling, I shall give you a corresponding definition. A man feels when what are called the initiative factors issue from one of the dispersed localizations of his common presence, which in contemporary science are called the sympathetic nerve nodes, the chief agglomeration of which is known by the name of solar plexus, and the whole totality of which functioning, in the terminology long ago established by me, is called the feeling centre, and he senses when the basis of his initiative factors is the totality of what are called the motor nerve nodes of the spinal and partly of the head brain, which is called, according to this terminology of mine, the moving centre. Just this difference in the nature of these two unknown to you independent sources constitutes the difference in functions which you do not distinguish. For this fourth preparatory exercise explained by me today, first of all it is necessary to learn with what exists in you now only as a substitute, so to say, fulfilling the obligation of what should in real man be self-willed attention, and in you is merely a self-tenseness, simultaneously to observe three heterogeneous results proceeding in you, each coming from different sources of the general functioning of your whole presence. Namely, one part of this attention of yours should be occupied with the constatation of the proceeding in one finger process of sensing, another with the constatation of the proceeding in another finger process of feeling, and the third should follow the counting of the automatic movement of the third finger. Although this fourth exercise is the most difficult of all the number of exercises composed in this series, yet, in the given case, as I have said, on account of various misunderstandings for you, in my opinion, only this exercise may, on the one hand, correct your errors of the past, and on the other hand, prepare all that is required for the future. And for cognizing its importance and indispensability for you, as well as its real difficulty, it is necessary to do it many, many times. At the beginning, you must try all the time only to understand the sense and significance of this exercise, without expecting to obtain any concrete result. As only an all-round understanding of the sense and significance of this fourth, and for you first, exercise, as well as the ability to carry it out, will perforce make it easier for you to cognize the sense and significance, as well as the carrying out, of all the subsequent exercises which are required for the acquisition of one's own individuality. I therefore advise you, so to say, to mobilize all your forces and possibilities in order that you should be able for a definite time not to be lazy, and at the same time to be, in relation to yourself, that is to say, to your weaknesses, quite merciless, because upon this first exercise depends your whole subsequent normal life and all your future possibilities, inherent only in man according to law. And so, if you really wish to have in yourself that which alone can distinguish a man from an ordinary animal, that is to say, if you wish to be really such a one to whom great nature has given the possibility with the desire, that is, with a desire issuing from all the free, separate, spiritualized parts, and with the conscious striving to transform yourself into a, so to say, cultivated soil for the germination and growth of that upon which lay the hopes and expectations of the Creator of everything existing, then you must always and in everything, struggling with the weaknesses that are in your according to law, attain at any cost, first of all, an all-round understanding, and then the practical realization in your presence of this exercise just elucidated by me, in order to have the chance for a conscious crystallizing in yourself of the data still engendering the three mentioned impulses, which must be present obligatorily in the common presence of every man who has the right to call himself a godlike creature.